In a dramatic development that has captured the attention of governments and media around the world, the United States has officially charged Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro with serious crimes, including drug trafficking and weapons offenses. The announcement, made by the U.S. Department of Justice, represents one of the most direct legal challenges ever leveled against a sitting head of state. The charges have immediate implications not just for Venezuela, but for U.S. foreign policy, regional stability, and international law. According to U.S. officials, the charges stem from years of alleged criminal activity linked to Maduro and members of his inner circle. The accusations include directing the transport of illegal narcotics into the United States and using military forces to support and protect these operations. U.S. authorities argue that these activities have contributed to widespread violence, instability, and corruption in Venezuela, affecting millions of people both inside the country and abroad. The announcement comes at a time when Venezuela is already facing a severe economic crisis, with widespread shortages, hyperinflation, and political unrest. Maduro has maintained power despite domestic opposition, a partially fractured international community, and mounting sanctions from the United States and the European Union. For Washington, the legal action signals a willingness to escalate pressure on Maduro personally, rather than targeting only his government or institutions. The legal action also carries symbolic weight. It sends a clear message that the United States is prepared to hold foreign leaders accountable under U.S. law when alleged criminal activities directly affect Americans or American interests. Experts say this step may alter how current and future leaders around the world view engagement with the United States. Venezuelan authorities immediately condemned the announcement, calling it a political attack aimed at destabilizing the country and undermining national sovereignty. Supporters of Maduro argue that the charges are part of a broader pattern of U.S. intervention in Latin America, echoing decades of tense relations between Washington and Caracas. The world is watching closely, as the situation could escalate tensions not just in Latin America, but also in the broader hemisphere. Part 1 sets the stage for a deeper exploration of the historical and geopolitical context behind these charges, which we will examine in the next part. The charges against President Nicolas Maduro did not emerge in a vacuum. They are the latest chapter in a long and often tense history between the United States and Venezuela. For decades, relations between the two countries have been strained, influenced by ideological differences, economic interests, and regional security concerns. Understanding this background helps explain why the U.S. has taken such a direct and unprecedented legal step. Since Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999, Venezuela pursued a socialist agenda that challenged U.S. influence in Latin America. Chavez and later Maduro nationalized key industries, particularly oil, and aligned Venezuela with nations that the United States often views as adversaries, including Cuba, Russia, and China. Over the years, Washington accused Caracas of undermining democracy, suppressing opposition voices, and violating human rights. Economic sanctions, travel bans, and diplomatic pressures became common tools in the U.S. strategy. Maduro assumed power after Chavez's death in 2013, inheriting both the oil-rich nation and its deep political and economic challenges. His presidency has been marked by severe economic decline, with millions of Venezuelans fleeing the country due to shortages of food, medicine, and basic services. U.S. officials have repeatedly accused Maduro's government of corruption and drug trafficking, claiming that military and political elites have facilitated criminal networks for decades. The escalation to formal criminal charges is unprecedented. While the United States has long imposed sanctions and issued indictments against members of Maduro's government, charging a sitting president directly with drug and weapons offenses signals a new level of assertiveness.
Legal experts say this could be one of the strongest actions the U.S. has taken against a foreign head of state in recent history. Venezuela's response has been swift and defiant. Government officials describe the move as an act of aggression, accusing the United States of attempting to interfere in internal affairs and destabilize the country. Supporters of Maduro frame the charges as part of a broader narrative of U.S. intervention in Latin America, drawing historical parallels with Cold War-era actions in the region. This part shows that this conflict is deeply rooted in decades of political, economic, and ideological tension. In the next part, we will examine the specifics of the charges, including what the United States alleges Maduro did and the evidence that officials have presented.
The charges announced by the United States against President Nicolas Maduro are serious and far-reaching. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, Maduro is accused of directing large-scale drug trafficking operations that sent cocaine and other narcotics from Venezuela into the United States. These operations allegedly involved top military and political officials who provided protection, logistics, and access to Venezuelan ports and airports. The U.S. claims that these networks contributed to the flooding of American cities with illegal drugs, with devastating effects on communities and public health. In addition to narcotics charges, the indictment alleges that Maduro used weapons to protect these operations and maintain political power. U.S. authorities say he oversaw the use of military and paramilitary forces to suppress opposition, intimidate critics, and ensure that criminal activities could continue without interference. These weapons offenses are linked directly to both internal repression in Venezuela and the broader trafficking networks that span the region. U.S. officials have described the evidence as extensive, including testimony from former officials, intercepted communications, and financial tracking of illicit transactions. While much of this evidence remains confidential due to national security concerns, Washington has emphasized that it is confident in the strength of the case. The Department of Justice argues that these charges are not political but criminal, aimed at holding individuals accountable for acts that directly harm the United States. The announcement has raised complex questions in international law. Charging a sitting head of state is unusual and controversial. Some legal experts argue that U.S. jurisdiction over a foreign president is limited, while others point out that Maduro's alleged actions directly impacted the United States, which gives Washington the legal basis for prosecution. This legal debate will likely play out in the courts and on the diplomatic stage for months, if not years. For Maduro and his government, the charges are being portrayed as part of a campaign of intimidation. Caracas has dismissed the claims as fabricated and politically motivated, insisting that Venezuela remains a sovereign nation free from foreign interference. Supporters of Maduro say the charges are intended to destabilize the country further and justify additional sanctions or potential intervention. This part focuses on the substance of the allegations, highlighting why the U.S. has taken such an extraordinary step. In the next part, we will explore the immediate reactions from Venezuela, the United States, and the international community, and what this means for diplomacy in the region. The announcement of criminal charges against President Nicolas Maduro triggered immediate and intense reactions, both inside Venezuela and around the world. In Caracas, the government responded with anger and defiance. Senior officials rejected the accusations outright, calling them false and politically motivated. Maduro himself accused the United States of trying to remove him from power by legal and economic pressure, saying the charges were part of a long campaign to control Venezuela's oil and influence its politics. Inside Venezuela, the reaction has been deeply divided. Supporters of the government see the charges as proof of U.S. hostility and interference, reinforcing a long-standing narrative that Washington is trying to dominate the country.
State media echoed this message, describing the move as an attack on national sovereignty. At the same time, opposition figures welcomed the charges, arguing that they confirm what they have long claimed about corruption and criminal activity at the highest levels of government. For them, the U.S. action brings international attention to Venezuela's crisis and the suffering of its people. In the United States, officials defended the decision firmly. The Department of Justice and other agencies said the charges were based on law enforcement investigations, not politics. They stressed that no one is above the law, even a sitting president, if their actions cause harm to Americans. U.S. leaders also framed the move as part of a broader fight against international drug trafficking and organized crime. The international response has been cautious and mixed. Some countries aligned with the United States expressed support for efforts to combat drug trafficking and corruption. Others, including nations friendly to Venezuela, warned that charging a sitting head of state could increase tensions and destabilize the region. International organizations avoided taking clear sides, instead calling for dialogue, respect for international law, and peaceful solutions. This wide range of reactions shows how sensitive and serious the situation is. The charges against Maduro are not just a legal matter, they have become a major diplomatic issue. In the next part, we will examine how this development could affect Venezuela's economy, U.S. foreign policy, and the wider region in the months ahead. The charges against President Nicolas Maduro are already having serious effects, even before any court action takes place. For Venezuela, the move deepens an already severe crisis. The country remains under heavy U.S. sanctions, and this legal action further isolates Maduro on the international stage. Financial pressure is expected to increase, making it harder for Venezuela to access global markets, attract investment, or negotiate economic relief. For ordinary Venezuelans, this raises fears that living conditions could worsen, with shortages of food, medicine, and basic services continuing or even growing. Politically, the charges strengthen divisions inside Venezuela. The opposition sees the U.S. action as validation of its long-standing claims about corruption and criminal networks in power. This may energize opposition groups, but it could also lead the government to tighten control, citing national security threats. Analysts warn that this could reduce space for dialogue and make a peaceful political solution more difficult. For the United States, the case carries both risks and rewards. On one hand, it shows Washington taking a tough stance against international drug trafficking and corruption, reinforcing its message that criminal behavior targeting Americans will be punished. On the other hand, it complicates diplomacy. Any future talks with the Maduro government now face a major legal and political obstacle. U.S. policymakers must balance law enforcement goals with the need to manage migration, energy concerns, and regional stability. Across Latin America, governments are watching closely. Venezuela's crisis has already pushed millions of refugees into neighboring countries, putting pressure on public services and economies. If tensions rise further or the situation inside Venezuela deteriorates, the region could face new waves of migration and instability. Some leaders fear that escalating confrontation could harden positions and reduce chances for negotiated solutions. This 5 makes clear that the charges are not just about one man or one case. They are shaping political decisions, economic conditions, and regional relations. In the final part, we will look ahead to what comes next and what this moment could mean for the future of U.S. policy and global justice.
As the legal and political shockwaves continue, the question now facing the world is what happens next. The charges against President Nicolas Maduro placed the United States and Venezuela on an even more complicated path, with few easy options for either side. While the case has been announced, bringing it to court is another matter entirely. Maduro remains in power inside Venezuela, and there is no clear legal mechanism to force his arrest unless he leaves the country or a major political change occurs at home. Legal experts say the charges may remain symbolic in the short term, but symbols matter in global politics. The indictment restricts Maduro's ability to travel internationally, limits diplomatic engagement, and sends a strong warning to others accused of similar crimes. It also increases pressure on those within Venezuela's political and military leadership, some of whom may fear future charges or sanctions. Diplomatically, the situation narrows the space for negotiation. Any attempt by the United States to re-engage with the Maduro government on issues such as oil production, migration, or regional security now faces serious political resistance at home. At the same time, Venezuela may turn more strongly toward allies who oppose U.S. influence, further reshaping alliances in the region. For the international community, this case raises difficult questions about justice and sovereignty. Supporters argue that global crime requires global accountability, even at the highest levels of power. Critics warn that using national courts against foreign leaders could set dangerous precedents and increase global tensions. This part highlights that this moment is far from resolved. The charges against Nicolas Maduro have opened a new chapter filled with uncertainty, risk, and debate. In the final part, we will examine what this case means for the United States, global law enforcement, and the future of how the world responds to alleged crimes by powerful leaders.
The charges against Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, mark a defining test for how the world deals with alleged crimes by powerful leaders. For the United States, this case reflects a broader strategy of using legal tools, not just diplomacy or sanctions, to confront what it sees as threats to its citizens and security. Supporters say it shows seriousness and consistency in fighting international drug trafficking and organized crime. Critics argue it could harden divisions and make peaceful solutions harder to reach. For global justice, the case raises important questions. Can national courts hold foreign leaders accountable when international systems struggle to act? Does this approach strengthen the rule of law, or does it risk turning justice into another arena of political conflict? These questions have no easy answers, but they are now part of a wider global debate that goes far beyond Venezuela. The situation also matters for the wider world because it shows how interconnected global problems have become. Drug trafficking, corruption, migration, and political instability do not stop at borders. Decisions made in Washington or Caracas can affect communities across the Americas and beyond. How this case unfolds will influence how countries cooperate or clash in dealing with shared threats. For Venezuela's people, the future remains uncertain. While international pressure continues, many citizens are focused on daily survival and the hope for stability, opportunity, and dignity. Whether the charges lead to change, dialogue, or deeper confrontation will shape their lives for years to come. In the end, this story is not only about one president or one set of charges. It is about power, accountability, and the limits of international law in a divided world. As events continue to develop, the world will be watching closely, aware that the outcome could influence how justice and leadership are judged on the global stage for a long time to come.